Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together to camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had one missed call on my phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There were plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table, and the lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. This figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a late night walk. The people I usually see have flashlights though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. There's no reason to be. I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my phone call. A minute or two passes and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if I knew him or if he could see me clearly. He was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I'm frozen, and I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then he started moving again. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunched form. It looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I could hear him trampling behind me. Leaves scuffling, heavy-set footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and louder and closer. I made it back to the narrow trail. Once he got close to where I about was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a oof noise that came from the man, which I can imagine maybe was him tripping, or almost tripped, or maybe got face slapped by a tree branch. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running, until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire. I broke down crying and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened. My aunt spoke up and said, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming to give you a good scare as a joke." She dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized he didn't actually know you." They all chuckled about it and changed the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of that night to be ruined, really, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general. I'm very cautious and shy. For that time being, I let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking. But I am here years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that, nothing really happened. It was still a great trip, and it was still well time spent with the family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself though. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. my friends and I decided to head up to a remote part of the Chattahoochee National Forest to spend our Friday night and Saturday out camping. I had been camping before, but this was going to be the first time doing it deep in the woods with basically no humans within a 5 to 10 mile radius and no cell service. We set up our camp near an old logging path. Once we got settled into camp, we made some dinner, and shortly after, we're getting cleaned up, because it was completely dark. And out in the woods, it was the darkest I have ever seen. As the fire started to burn out, we decided to call it a night and head to our tent. At this point, I was already having trouble sleeping. If you've ever experienced the quietness of the woods, you know it's so quiet that it's loud. Every twig snapping and rustling in the leaves had freaked me out. I fell asleep finally after about an hour. I woke up in the late night to the sound of a very large truck and a dog barking like crazy. My friend's tent was right in front of mine, so I immediately hear him whisper to me, "Wake up, now!" I can hear the sound of his shotgun pumping as I'm grabbing the machete I have in my tent. The truck is now driving directly next to our camp, and this dog is going nuts. He stops, gets out, and starts screaming incomprehensible shit. It sounded like somebody yelling at a concert, but with no music playing. Then he takes a piss on the tree and starts laughing hysterically. After what felt like an hour, this guy gets back in his truck and speeds off. We both think it may have been some guy that comes out here to do drugs or other types of illegal shit. But to me, it sounded like someone who was completely mentally insane. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, and I hope I never meet that mentally insane mountain man ever again.
I work the graveyard shift at work, and when I come home, my wife leaves for work. I am typically exhausted and mildly sleep deprived. My adventure happened mid-morning, before my son and I's nap time. I also only get 3 to 4 hours of actual sleep in the evening before my shift. I believe this detail can help this community come to a conclusion. I'm also going to make a separate post with photos of the trail, a picture of my son and I with the wagon, the map of the trail, and an approximate area where the anomaly was observed. I'm an Armed Forces veteran, USA, on the East Coast. My son is only 2 years old, and this event happened about 1 week ago. Every now and then, I like to take my son out on walks around the neighborhood in his wagon. We would typically travel to one of the nearby playgrounds so that he can blow off some energy before his afternoon nap. I live in a decent area that has a newly developed houses and townhomes, and the housing development is still expanding greatly. This particular day was beautiful. Lightly cloudy, somewhat hot, but with a frequent cool down due to passing clouds. I thought that today would be a great day to take my son out for a stroll and head over to a newly made playground that I saw on the way home one day. So we set off, packed with a couple of water bottles and a snack just in case. As we were doing a brief tour around the neighborhood, I noticed a state-sponsored and well-maintained trail entrance that I'd never noticed while driving around here. I decided, screw it, it's a pretty nice day, my son likes nature, he won't mind. So off we went on this very distinctive, clear trail with mile markers every quarter mile and yellow markers on trees every 100 feet or so to let you know that you were on the correct path. Everything was going well for the first mile and a quarter. We were fairly deep in the woods, but certainly no more than a quarter mile from the developments at any given time. We came across a bridge that went over a small trench and proceeded for about another half mile after that. Then things slowly started to seem off. The clear yellow markers that were put on the trees started disappearing, probably due to vandalism because the nail was still there, but the marker itself was completely gone. I didn't mind much, because the path was still definitive, deliberate, and well maintained. But then I heard a loud snapping sound that sounded like it was roughly 50 to 75 feet back. I immediately halted the wagon and looked back to see what it was. This is where things got surreal. As I looked back, I noticed that the trail I was walking on lost all sense of familiarity. There were trees I didn't see, certain plants I know for sure went through before, stuff like that. But regardless, I kept my composure and stared deeply into the woods to see what made that snapping sound. I scanned the area and didn't see any life forms, but for some reason, my eyes started to fixate on a particularly unnerving dark section of the forest. For whatever reason, my body started locking up, and every single alarm bell in my head was pinging. No matter how hard I tried to focus on this dark patch, I couldn't see anything. I had the weirdest sensation of being able to see each individual branch and plant in high detail, but I couldn't focus on the scene overall. It was super blurry. I also felt my internal fight or flight mechanism flipping between the two decisions faster than a coin in a coin toss. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out why my senses were not working anymore. This instinctual part of my brain was screaming that there was something there, but I absolutely could not observe it. Whatever little light was in that area seemed to bend around this one central point, somewhat like how a cloaking device works. It was a minor distortion, but enough to make it strangely obvious. I then noticed how I hadn't heard a peep from the forest this entire time, and I was feeling very cold, even during an 85+ degree weather. I could not shake this feeling of impending doom, probably what one feels when they're on the verge of death. I felt exceptionally vulnerable because I was not armed and had no way of dealing with whatever the hell this was. Eventually, I was able to snap out of my trance briefly to look down at my son and saw that his body was contorted around his seat, frozen and staring exactly where the anomaly was, with his mouth agape and his eyes wide and dilated. This is when I knew I wasn't hallucinating and that we needed to get the hell out of there. I took advantage of my brief moment of clarity and ran like the wind with my son in tow. I looked back only once and saw that my boy was still looking towards the area, but not frozen in place anymore. It took all about a couple minutes to get out past the tree line onto a main road. For whatever reason, I broke down and started crying. My son looked at me like I was crazy. I'd never felt such sheer terror over what seemed like nothing in my whole life. I hadn't felt that way at all at any point in my life, in fact. The feeling that my son and I are completely vulnerable and that I wouldn't have been able to defend either of us. I also never had that distinct feeling of being able to see things perfectly, yet not able to register any of it in my head. My morbid curiosity wants me to revisit the place, equipped with a firearm and a GoPro to record any events that would arise, but I'm still trying to get over the previous experience for now. I've been in crazy situations before, but this trumps anything I have ever experienced.
I'm a 15-year-old male, and I've got a pretty interesting predicament. So around a year back, I'm camping with my Boy Scout troop. We were going to this thing called the Voyager Outpost, which is a one-night camp during the camp we are already at. We leave main camp and canoe 2 miles to the backside, where they dump us on an island, give us food to cook, and leave. We'd also have to build our own shelter. Seeing as it was July, the weather was amazing. Me and my buddies all had our shelters between 3 trees. Our shelters were hammocks with rope over the top, on which a reflective blanket would hang draped. Super comfy. Anyways, around 2 a.m., we heard a noise. It was more like a grunting. This quickly got louder until it was a deafening and loud growl. It was kind of like a black bear. But black bears don't live in our woods. No bears do, actually. We were on an island. The next morning, my 2 friends and I wake up. How we slept once walked away, I'm not sure. Around 6 a.m., we all have the exact same story, at the exact same time frame. We were all wearing watches, so we could easily tell what time it was. Seeing as how it was the exact same story, in the exact same time, and it was only us on the island, which was 100 square feet if that, we figured it must be somewhere in the surrounding woods. We looked around the island, first, only to find an owl feather next to a hawk feather. Owls are messengers of death, and when reached by witch doctor, Inuit I believe up north near Canada, I was told I was a hawk. At this point, I'm kinda creeped out. We looked in the water and there was nothing, no prints and nothing that looked out of the ordinary. We were surrounded by dense brush on the perimeter of the island, so it would have had to step over the brush if it had feet, making its initial print in the sandy pretty deep. But there was nothing. We get in our canoes and paddle around the island, looking for something, anything, but we just couldn't find anything. Flash forward to yesterday and I'm camping, just a weekender. I go by the stream to relax and stuff. There's a dead hawk. Fresh, no marks, no bullets, no holes, just dead. Last night an owl flew over my tent as I walked out to take a pee. I decided to hold it. Does anyone have a possible answer as to what's going on? Am I doomed or did I piss something off? Some answers would be greatly appreciated. I was probably 8 or so, and my church would always do a family camp. Basically, you have 20 or so families all camping out in the woods at the same time. It was always the highlight of my summers. This particular year, though, there had been an abundance of bear sightings where we usually went camping. Apparently, they had become more courageous and started wandering into camps regularly, so they needed to be relocated. In order to do this, they had to set up very large traps. The one nearest us was massive and was in a small clearing near the bathrooms. Inside was a dead deer hanging upside down. It always struck me as odd that they would have this in the middle of a campsite, and for the longest time I thought my friends and I must have imagined it. Years later though, someone who was an adult at the time confirmed the events. My friends and I all stayed in one tent together, and in the middle of the night we all woke up to a clanging sound. It sounded like something was clashing against the trap. After a small amount of clanging, it was completely quiet. We figured the trap must have snapped shut and caught the bear. A few hours later, I really needed to use the bathroom, and no scary bear in a trap was going to keep me from doing so. I pulled open the zipper and headed to the bathroom, but the trap caught my eye on the way. I was just starting to get light out, and I could clearly see that there was nothing in the trap. The deer had been taken out and the trap hadn't shut. Later, we looked at the trap from a distance and saw no footprints or nothing to indicate that a deer would have been dragged out by an animal. To this day, I still can't figure out what happened. Maybe it was a trap malfunction, or maybe it was something else that was smarter than a trap. I have a friend that's very big into squatching. That being said, I was very surprised at how level-headed and objective the guy was. He made it clear to me that this group had actually gathered a lot of very interesting evidence. He also explained that the Bigfoot community was full of fraudsters and they were the cause of the most ridicule associated with the subject. So he refers me to a few documentaries to watch, and after a few beers and some more research, I was hooked. I phoned him the next day and asked him when they were going squatching next. I was delighted when he informed me that I was welcome to join them that weekend, and he gave me a list of camping gear I would need. Now, likely, as anybody else would, I love to camp and hunt. I was just out for a good time. I wasn't taking this too seriously. Did I expect to see a Bigfoot? No, not really. Did I see a Bigfoot? No. But did we have a very good, interesting time and some unexpected experiences that I have difficulty explaining? Yes. The first was when my friend tried some wood knocking. This apparently was a way that the Bigfoot, should I call them big feet, communicate. It simply consists of knocking a bat or a board against the tree. So he walks up to a nice tall oak, takes a board, and proceeds to start whacking the shit out of it rhythmically. At this point, he looks like a total jackass, and I'm starting to feel like a jackass just watching him. Then he pauses, and I hear it. Whack, 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 off in the distance. The same as he did. I almost shat a cinder block. Someone or something was responding to him. The fucking squatchers all just smile and said, "It's good, sounds like they're still in the area." Good? Bigfoot being less than a mile away from you is good? I had not believed in Bigfoot at any level up until this point, but the forest was starting to look a lot creepier now than it sort of did before. I thought about the prospect of an 8-foot-tall hairy North American wood ape carrying me off into the trees for some sweet monkey love and cringed. According to my new buddy, who I'm starting to doubt the sanity of, Bigfoot is mostly harmless. They have been attacks, he says, but mostly they give you a lot of warning and would rather not be seen. I asked him how they warn people and he says, "You'll see. We're gonna get him nice and riled up tonight." Oh great, I'm literally messing with Sasquatch, except there's no beef jerky, it's cold as fuck, and I'm armed with nothing but a machete. I'm actually starting to get a little scared. I was already prairie dogging from the wood knocking exchange, and now I knew that something was just beginning. So the night goes on happily enough. Someone brought some ballpark franks and we cooked on the campfire. Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya, etc. Shit got real at around 1 a.m. My friend tells me more of the ways to antagonize Bigfoot. He said one of those ways is to play recorded tapes of pigs being slaughtered at the ridiculous volume. Hey, if it worked on Mick Jagger, why not Sasquatch? So he goes on ahead and starts blasting the most blood-curdling shit I've ever heard out of a megaphone. If you've played this shit while I was trying to sleep, I certainly wouldn't like you. And to my utter amazement, first one, then two, and then a lot of rocks started pelting us from the tree line. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, it's just rocks, don't be such a pussy. These were big fucking rocks. And I was even more scared when I realized that whoever was throwing these rocks had been standing at the tree line watching us. So under a hail of thrown rocks, we pick up our gear and move camp quickly. My friend informs me that we are completely safe, and I promptly disagree. I felt safer in Somalia. At least, there I had a gun and semi-sane people to get my back. He goes on to inform me, now that we have moved camp out of their territory, they will likely disperse. But I guess he knew his stuff because the rest of the night was pretty uneventful. I didn't sleep for obvious reasons. Now, did I see Bigfoot? No. I tried to look into the trees, I even put my flashlight on the tree line. This caused me to become more of a target for the rocks being thrown, and couldn't make out anything but dark shapes. They did look big, but nonetheless, they could have been pranksters. So I didn't have an encounter with North America's wood ape. And maybe I just had some kind of encounter with pranksters. But nonetheless, I won't be squatching anytime soon, because those events alone were enough to creep me right the hell out. I've never told this story to anyone before, simply to never having an answer, and thinking there's nothing that can be done. Many years ago, at Wongai Campgrounds in Queensland, Australia, my father, my friend, and I were out camping for a couple of days. Usually it's packed, but we went during the week and got 2 days off school. I can't remember the reason. I think it was just because my dad had a few days off, but that's besides the point. Due to it being midweek, the grounds were empty. We've been here many times before, but never alone. However, we were excited due to having the whole grounds to ourselves, which was pretty cool. Now, we were no strangers to the Australian bush. We know what to look out for, we know how to play it safe. So at night, knowing no one was around to mess with our camp, we decided to go for a mini bushwalk to walk to the other side of the river that runs along the grounds. When I say grounds, it's just a clearing in the middle of a bush. Not a properly established grounds, far away from all the roads. We got to the campsite on the opposite side of the river, and looking out the river, we could see a bright light just near our campgrounds. Thinking it could be the fire, we thought we put it out by that time, but we weren't sure, so we walked back through the bush to go to our site, still able to see the large lightning. However, we were going to our side, and we realized that it was not a fire. As we were able to come closer to the river this time, we saw that the light was over the river, not in it, but over it. We were somewhat scared, but thought there was some explanation for it, maybe a torch, or something along those lines. But looking for wherever we were, There was nothing under it. The light was a good 70 centimeters above the water, and still, dead still. The light itself was flickering, sort of like a fire, but it was in no way attached to anything. Just a large, between a tennis ball and soccer ball size, ball floating, giving off a strong fire-like light, but more like a light bulb center. This went on for maybe 30 minutes as we tried splashing the water and trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't move and didn't do anything. It just floated in that one spot, in complete silence, unlike the sound a fire would make. My dad decided to get a torch and his camera, and of course, being the scared 12-year-olds we were, we went with him. As soon as we go to the camp, which was only maybe 100 meters away, the light was gone. We ran back with a torch and nothing was there. No one there and no other campers, just gone. We didn't really talk about it because we didn't really know what it was, how or why. Lights are something that's very popular in the Australian outback, and that's the only explanation that I can think for. But they have no explanation, so it's kind of a dead-end story. When I was 15, my brother, 2 of our cousins, and I used to spend a week up north with my grandparents on a piece of land in Wisconsin that they bought. To set the scene, the land was about 5 acres in a rural part of the state, and the neighbors around us were summer people who only came up on weekends, meaning midweek was pretty desolate. My grandparents had 2 RV trailers on their land, one for their use and one for guest use. At 15, my parents decided to let my cousin, 13, and I use the guest RV just because they thought we were old enough to be by ourselves. They kept my brother, 11, and my younger cousin, 10, in their trailer. I had just returned from a week in Washington, D.C. with friends, so most of our nighttime rituals included gossiping about D.C. and the boy I had a crush on, who was there as well. Nothing concerning happened for the first few nights. As a precaution, my grandparents gave us a car key and an intercom just in case we got scared. Oh boy, how didn't I know that this would be used in one of our last nights there? It was around 10 p.m. and my grandparents and the others had gone to sleep, so we walked over to the other trailer. As we got in the trailer, we started to change when something in my head popped up. We hadn't locked the door. The voice in my head urged me to lock it. We had admittedly been bad about this. I went back and locked it, and my cousin and I went back to talking at the table. As my cousin talked about the boy she liked, I got this feeling of dread. I noticed that I stopped listening to her, and after a minute, she did too. She asked me what was wrong, and I shushed her. Outside the window next to us, the shades were closed, we heard a shuffling noise, as if someone was walking back and forth in front of the window. This went on for a solid 5 minutes. The noise approached the door, and I immediately hit the intercom button calling my grandpa. I told him that there were weird noises outside. Whoever was outside could most likely be hearing us talk because of the thin walls. We could still hear the shuffling. My grandpa's voice rang out over the intercom. "I'm grabbing my gun, I'll be right there." At that second, the shuffling stopped. I hear my grandpa rip open the door of his trailer, and he yelled out. He ran to our door and knocked, telling me it was him. I opened the door, and to this day, I have never seen the look of a crazed and terrified as my grandpa's face. He was holding his gun, and he asked us to follow him to his camper. We obliged and grabbed the stuff we needed. My brother and cousin and grandma were sitting up in the camper. My grandma looked terrified as she sat in the window staring out past us. We settled in and slept, but she sat there awake all night. The next day, we left 2 days early for home. My grandparents to this day tell us it was probably an animal and shush us up about the story. I'm 22, so it's been a while. I know it was a person, so does my cousin, but if I could go back, I would have ripped open those blinds so I could have made sure and not have to live with the wonder of who was on the other side. I was on a field trip to our local park. Our teacher decided to let us go on one of the trails. This trail had a larger trail and had a smaller trail inside its loop. The smaller trail had a slimy, stinky pond inside of it. The small trail was on a circular area surrounding the pond, but the pond had an area that went under a little bridge walkway. On one side of the bridge was the pond, on the other side was a flowing tiny creek. My friend and I decided just to take the small trail and stop at the bridge and wait, and then go back to the bus, because we didn't really feel like walking that day. So that is what we did. I remember it being shaded by the trees except for the little bridge, so my friend laid down on the bridge in the only sunny spot, facing the larger trail. You could see the smaller trail from the larger trail. I thought I saw a crawdad. I loved those things and decided I was going to go into the little creek and grab it. I remember thinking that it was convenient that there were stone steps down into the creek. I walked down them and thought nothing of it. I remember standing in the creek and looking down in it. I remember saying to my friend along the lines of something that doesn't look right in this creek. Look at it, it just seems to go on for a long time, but it shouldn't. I mean, it should end at the parking lot, but the parking lot was in front of the trail right outside the tree line. I remember nothing else. Nothing. At some point my shoe was untied, and I stooped down to tie it, and my stomach growled. I said to my friend, "We need to get back." I stepped at the rocks of the creek and onto the bridge. My friend said, "Yeah." I remember me being afraid. I was like, it was feeling spooky here. It seems so late, let's go and hurry. She agreed. We got up and we ran towards the entrance. Our teacher, our classmates, and our buses were gone. But the cops, the firemen, and the principal and our parents were all there. They were getting ready to drag the pond. We had been gone for around 4 hours. Numerous people walked both trails and walked over that little bridge, they said. They were mad because they said we could not have been where we said we were. And they were mad because they thought we were hiding and not coming when they screamed our names. But we weren't lying. My friend and I became distant. We've never talked about it since, not even once. This happened to my friend, who was working as a police officer at the time. We shall call my friend Tom. Anyways, Tom had just begun working as an officer, and as a result he got stuck with lousy shifts. Tom worked in a neighborhood where just about nothing bad ever happened, but working graveyard shifts at parks in the area can still be pretty creepy. Usually, he would just find a couple stoners hanging out on a swing set. This one night, Tom had a shift at a local park he didn't often go to. It's about 2 a.m. and his only job is to make sure no one is around and all is well. As he's walking around the outskirts of the woods, he sees one man just standing with his back facing towards him on the edge of the darkness of the woods. He yelled to the man, "Hey you, what are you doing? Come on over here right now." The man turned and smiled at him. Then he dashed into the woods. Without really thinking, Tom sprinted after him. The guy was booking it, leaping over bushes and ducking under fallen trees like a pro. Tom is an extremely athletic guy, but this man was on a different level. As Tom finally catches the guy, he again yells to him. The man smiles once again, then books it once again. Tom kept after him, but was a good ways away from him, about 10 to 15 feet behind. This guy finally reached the clearing in the woods. Tom's adrenaline running low, and it's taking all his power to keep screaming for the guy to stop. The guy turns and smiles once more. The guy books it over the hill, seemingly to a steep slower this time. Tom draws his gun and powers up the hill. The guy was gone. According to Tom, he just literally disappeared. There was no way he could have escaped normally. To this day, Tom recounts it as an encounter with something very sinister. The only thing he could find in the woods was a makeshift, run-down campsite that looked like it hadn't been inhabited in years.